Excited to introduce our guest for today's episode of Hanging at the Reef. Dan Silvert is a renowned expert in personality assessment and organizational development with over 2 decades of experience in the field. As president of Velocity Advisory Group, he's partnered with numerous organizations to enhance leadership, build collaborative teams, and drive cultural transformation. Dan is also the author of The True Competitive Advantage, a book that delves into the power of leadership and team dynamics. His innovative approach, particularly in his use of the BIRDS model to simplify complex personality concepts, has made him a sought-after speaker and consultant. Today, he'll share his insights on how understanding personality types can strengthen team collaboration and organizational success. Well, welcome to Hanging at the Reef, Dan. We are excited to have you with us today.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be here.
So, let's jump right in. I've had now firsthand experience with the BIRDS model. I found it fascinating, as well as extremely valuable in building a collaborative team dynamic. But let's start with a brief history of the BIRDS model and what inspired its creation.
Sure. So the birds are based on the DISC behavioral model. That's DISC. And DISC has been around for a long time, really since the 1940s. It was first used for the GIs when they came back from World War II to help place them into new professions. And thereafter, it was revised and tweaked, and a bunch of PhDs got involved, and it's now the most validated behavioral profile assessment that's out there. And it's in the public domain. So we taught DISC for many years, my then book partner at the time. And it dawned on us that, acronyms are kind of boring. And we're all filled with lots of acronyms, right, in our day-to-day. And we said, why don't we add some fun to this? And instead of DISC, let's use some metaphors that are evocative of the deeper implications of this material. And so we came up with the birds, eagles, parrots, doves, and owls. And what, I found it subsequently is that, well, they're just sticky. There's something magical about these metaphors. And in my organization, when we work with clients 10 years later, they're still talking about the birds. It ends up becoming a huge part of their cultural dynamic.
Well, what a great idea, in terms of a way to simply allow people to understand the archetypes, what makes up each, great metaphors for behavior, just from the names of each bird alone. You've really created a powerful way to communicate a complex concept. People think about workplace assessments and personality assessments, and a lot of folks have experience with Myers-Briggs, for example. I remember
Right.
taking that almost 30 years ago in the workplace. So we all kind of think of ourselves by those Myers-Briggs acronyms. Let's go a little deeper into the birds and tell us about, what is it to be an eagle or a dove or an owl or a parrot? What makes up those archetypes?
Sure. Well, you know what? I'm going to ask you. Let's do it this way. When you think of an eagle in the wild, Jeff, what comes to mind for you?
I think of, an apex predator soaring above everything with a bird's eye view of the entire landscape, allowing a good strategic understanding of the lay of the land. I think of leadership. Those are the things that come to mind when I think of an eagle.
Well, there you go. So most people think of a predator, and we're not suggesting that people that have a lot of eagle energy are predators in the workplace, but we are suggesting that, your colleague that might be an eagle or your manager or someone that reports to you, they're intense. People with eagle energy have intensity because eagles in the wild dive bomb for prey. And that's not a gentle moment if you've ever seen it, live or
Yeah.
on video or something. And eagles in the workplace, they dive bomb for goals. And if you find yourself in between an eagle style and his or her goal, it's probably going to be an intense moment.
Well,
And
that sounds a little scary. Maybe eagles are not the best thing to have in the workplace. Is that true?
oh, not at all. Not at all. Eagle energy is essential for getting things done. So the primary traits of people with a lot of eagle in them, in their behavior, is that they're very bottom line focused because their primary objective is to achieve results. So All the styles value results, but if you got a lot of eagle energy, you are personally defined by results. And so that gives you a sense of urgency and maybe some tunnel vision, some hyper focus on what it takes to achieve whatever result you fixed your sights on, right? And so based upon that, you are going to be more direct in how you communicate. You're going to be decisive in how you make decisions. And yes, you're going to be a bottom line listener. Let's cut to the chase. Let's get there. What will it take to advance the ball? Right? Eagles bring that intensity to the table.
So, all right, so those are some good traits to have. So there's some balance of some things that could be perhaps intimidating to other team members, but are valued by leadership in the organization. And since DISC is all about figuring out personality archetypes and how to communicate with one another effectively, of the other three bird archetypes, who do eagles do well with and maybe not so well with?
Well, you know what? Let's go through all four of them. So we've got Eagles with their fundamental focus being results, and because of that fundamental, they behave in those ways. They're direct, they're decisive, they're bottom line. And then you have Parrots. So, all right, well, hold on, Jeff. What comes to mind when you think of a parrot, a real one? What jumps out at you?
I think of high energy. I think of a lot of repeat of information, confirmation of information, wanting to know information, wanting to move fast, being a little hyper, maybe
Hold
tense
on,
even.
hold on, hold on. I mean a real parrot in the wild, an actual parrot.
Well, I would think energy and excitement and movement and activity.
Sure. So, and a real parrot is what? Colorful. Okay. They draw attention to themselves. They talk. I mean, we kind of take it for granted that this bird can actually speak whatever language you happen to speak. I mean, if your dog just started talking to you, it probably grab your attention. But we don't think twice when an actual parrot speaks our language. So that's pretty clever. And they tend to draw attention to themselves again and be very well, positive and funny. I mean, nobody buys a pet parrot because it's depressed. So parrots in the workplace, they are colorful and they do draw attention to themselves and they are very optimistic and they're big picture in their focus like eagles are. But the difference between eagles and parrots is that for eagles, that fundamental is results, but for parrots, the fundamental is experience, having a positive experience because when you combine those two, new possibilities open up. And parrots are all about what is possible, not what is perfected. That's a different style. By the
Well,
way, my favorite parrot in the business world is Sir Richard Branson. Wildly creative. I mean, how many record companies naturally morph into airlines? Not many, right? Exactly one. And that's what he did. So, Virgin Records became Virgin Airlines and then came, Virgin Galactic and Virgin Trains. And so what Branson did was take parrot energy and it didn't matter what the industry was. What mattered was the culture of the organization and how it served its companies. And that's a people-focused approach to business. And Branson brings all that parrot magic to all the industries that he gets himself involved in. So it's very unique that way.
can
So
can parrots be leaders, or do they have to, steal some of that eagle energy? So is it a process of, you know, cross-tabbing different archetypes, or can a parrot assume natural leadership?
sure. Well, all the styles represent leadership. They just represent from different perspectives. So absolutely. In fact, a very common leadership pattern is eagle, parrot, parrot, eagle. Why? Because both are extroverted. Both draw attention to themselves. Both are big picture and vision oriented. So it's very common for parrots to be in leadership roles. And then they surround themselves with the other styles.
Well, let's talk about the other styles. So there's two more that we need to understand to get a full picture of the DISC personality assessment. So tell us about doves. What makes up a dove?
Well, when we think of doves in the wild, the natural, what people say is that it's a symbol of peace, international symbol, right? Of peace and harmony. Now, now, why is that? Well, let's contrast doves with eagles again. So eagles in the wild, the eagle is a lone ranger, right? So, I mean, when you think of an eagle, do you think of a flock of eagles hanging out, chilling, right? Patrolling by themselves. So that means that built into an eagle's DNA is if I don't hunt, kill, and eat for myself, I will die. So self-reliance is key to an eagle's interaction with the world. And eagles in the workplace take that on. They're very self-reliant. Well, doves in the wild nest in huge flocks. And doves travel together. So built into a dove's DNA in the wild is that if a flock is threatened, I'm threatened. The exact opposite energy as eagles. So doves in the wild, well, they're the symbol of peace because they're taking care of their flocks. Well, doves in the workplace are all about the culture. So if our culture at the office and our organization is one in which people are frazzled or nervous or uncertain about the future, then the individual dove will feel that. They will take that in and they will do everything they can to smooth over other people's issues with what's going on. Right? So doves are the peacemakers.
That's a very important quality to have in members of a team. The peacemakers, the ability to bring people together, to maybe, soften some of the rough edges of some of the other archetypes as people move through maybe more matter-of-fact agendas. So doves have an interesting set of qualities. What about owls? I think, we all can think of what an owl as a metaphor represents. What are the traits that make up the archetype in your model?
For owls, you know what? Let me go back a little bit on the doves.
Sure.
Uh, so first of all, the biggest misconception about doves in the workplace is that they're weak, that they lack the fortitude to make difficult decisions, and it's very untrue. In fact, each of the styles is very misunderstood, and so I think no one is. There's not a more stubborn person in your life than a dove style who has made a decision. Because once doves make a decision, they will quietly and politely steamroll you.
I wouldn't think of that trait from a dove.
Oh yeah,
Decisiveness or steamrolling.
they will do it, but they'll do it in a quiet way, right? They will simply be so consistent in their approach and stubborn in their insistence that their way makes the most sense that eventually the other side will back down. This is the strong silent type. Right? So the idea that doves are weak is kind of nonsense. So while the primary focus of dove energy is harmony and listening and patience, fortitude is a major component of a dove's makeup. They bring a lot of fortitude to everything they do. So now we go to the owls, and the fundamental focus of owl energy is accuracy. Why? Because owls in the wild, well, when you think of an owl in the wild, what do you think of it? The wise owl.
A lot of information, wide eyes, assimilation of information, assessment of that information, working through of that information.
Yeah, and if you think about it, owls in the wild are pretty terrifying creatures. I mean, they're up all night. What are they doing? They're hunting. Okay. They can spot prey 2 football fields away at dusk. They have supersonic hearing. Okay. So they have insane powers of precision. Right? Owls in the workplace, while they're not terrifying, well, they have standards. And those standards of precision and accuracy and process and rigor, well, that can be a little intimidating for their coworkers. Now, it's not an owl's intent to go to the office and intimidate anybody. And yet it does happen because, well, these are special powers that people with a lot of owl energy possess. And I think it comes so naturally to owls in the workplace to have these superpowers of precision that it's hard for them to appreciate that others simply don't have that. And so it's very interesting working with owls on leadership teams because their standards for data acquisition and validation are higher than other styles. And so that makes for some very interesting team dynamics.
Well, there's clearly, attributes and qualities across all four of these bird archetypes that you would want represented on your team. for various reasons. And I imagine the entire process is built around figuring out how to understand, which you are and how to work together in an effective way. So in your practice, how do you typically introduce this model to organizations and teams and get people focused on their archetype, but more importantly, the archetype of those around them so they can figure out how to work more effectively?
Well, we're usually brought in to work with leadership teams, or in a lot of cases, executive coaching a particular individual, project teams as well. And they take the profile. We send it to them. They take it, and then in the session itself, we reveal their styles to them, and then we see how accurate is it. And what we find is 9 times out of 10. I mean, it's crazy how accurate the profile is given that it only takes about 10 minutes to complete. So there are many different profiles out there in the marketplace. The reason we use DISC is because it's simple and it's practical. Because people don't have time to get a PhD. Okay. You just want to understand yourself better, understand the people around you better, and then be able to take steps to improve relationships. And that's really what our focus tends to be. So you get a leadership team, let's say, they take the profile, and then they find out, oh, okay, well, no surprise here. The CEO and the CFO are both eagle owls. And the head of HR is a dove owl, and the head of IT is a super high intensity owl. And then you have a few others on the team, and they have different combinations. And then the question is, well, okay, so how does that manifest? What does that look like in our meetings, or when we make difficult decisions, or how we arrive at conclusions? When does each style know that they're right? Because depending on what your style combination is, you arrive at what you think is right quite differently. And this is where the magic is. The magic is in honoring the styles of your coworkers so that you can learn how they think and appreciate how they arrive at different conclusions than you.
So it sounds like the goal, is less about even discovering what your archetype is. You may already know it. You may now put a name to it and be able to quantify the attributes of the bird that, you represent. But it seems like the real purpose of this exercise is really to understand those around you and how to connect on a more consistent and communicative level with people so that you can work more effectively with one another. Are there environments or contexts where this tends to work better than others? Knowledge jobs versus maybe, more blue collar environments where people are out, in the field, or does it work for any environment?
It works for any environment. We're fortunate to work in a number of different industries, from construction to pharmaceuticals to you name it. And wherever there are people, right, you're going to have a very predictable set of strengths and challenges. And I think it's the predictive nature of it that I think is kind of refreshing for people, because they realize, oh, I'm not so unusual, or the problems that we're having, they're not insurmountable. Lots of people have the same issues, and they were able to work it out. So we should be able to work it out too. Um, let me give you an example of that. Eagles look at conflict like a sport. They don't take it personally. Now, I don't care if you're the CEO of a corporation or you're a brand new employee, you're fresh out of college. If you've got a lot of eagle energy in you, then engaging in conflict, let me tell you, what a dove would call a full-blown conflict, an eagle would call a conversation. They barely even recognize the concept of conflict. So whether you're in a construction firm or you're in a pharmaceutical, debating over which compounds you want to advance to the next stage, the eagles will engage with an intensity that other styles will find over the top, and it shuts them down. So what do we do about that? Well, let's match the moment, not the mirror. Meaning, if you're the one that has a lot of eagle energy and you're in a room with a bunch of doves, you need to match the moment. Meaning you need to lean in the direction of the doves and, let's say, owls that are in the room, by speaking their language and matching their energy. And then they need to do the same with you. It's a two-way street. So if the eagles can tone it down and the owls and doves can candor up and say it out loud, not just in their heads, then we can arrive at this place where we're really communicating and again honoring what each of us bring to the table.
I like the way that you've positioned this because it presents sort of both the long-term objective of understanding people's personalities to develop longer-term collaborative working relationships, but there's also a need, for transactional interactions from time to time in a big brainstorming meeting or an important meeting, maybe with people that you don't interact that often but need to communicate effectively with and work together. So you've got an ability to both, as you said, meet the moment and flex up to rise to that occasion and be effective in that particular forum, but then also the ability to work longer term on these relationships by understanding how to approach somebody based on your own strengths and personality and their own. So it has benefit both short term and long term. Are there common misunderstandings or conflicts that often arise between the bird types?
Sure. Let's use change. I mean, I'm using generic topics because again, for your listeners, we're suggesting it really doesn't matter what type of organization you work with. You're pretty much going to have a lot of the same issues, which is a good thing because it's hard to you can't arrive at wisdom without generalities. There need to be general principles in order for wisdom to surface. And so let's use change for an example. For example, so once again, going eagle parrot dove owl, DISC. Eagles don't really care about change so much. They're hyper focused on results, right? But owls care about change a lot because if you don't have a firmly documented, rigorously vetted rationale for what the change is, why it is we're doing the change, and what the most likely outcomes are going to be, then the chances are pretty good you're not prepared for this change. And here you are proposing it. Now, are the owls incorrect? No, they're not. But that's not how eagles and parrots roll. Parrots look at change as an opportunity to engage with the world. And it is through the engagement that we learn. We don't plan it all out in our heads first, figure it out in our heads first, and then do it. No, we just kind of jump in and start swimming, right? And when we hit obstacles, we swim around them, right? Or we get knocked back. And so the parrot approach to change is experiential. The eagle approach to change is let's fall down and get up, fall down and get up. And each time we fail, we get smarter. But for the owls, that's called chaos. By the way, for people with a lot of dove energy, just watching the eagles and parrots and owls grapple with their different approaches to change, that's upsetting to doves because doves want harmony. All right. So very often you'll see the doves in the group be the facilitators of finding middle ground. And the key, I think, is that no one's wrong. The eagles are right. You have to fail a bunch of times in order to be successful. So you should just fall down, get up, fall down. And the parrots are right too. Why not make it fun? Why not enjoy the journey? Why not be open to what is possible as opposed to terrified of making mistakes? But hey, the owls are correct too. It's how come there's never enough time to do it right, but there always seems to be enough time to do it again. All right. For the owls, why don't we just plan this thing properly and then we won't be all over the place? They're not incorrect. Right. And again, for the doves, change itself is an opportunity for us to work together. It's not about the change, it's about the human input around change. So once you understand this, then you stop convicting people of crimes they didn't actually commit.
I was going to ask, we talked earlier about, some of the leadership qualities and some of the natural, beliefs that people have about leaders and metaphors of eagles soaring as representative leadership. But you called out early in the conversation that any of the archetypes could be leaders. Are there, though, certain archetypes that when you look historically, perhaps at people that have been effective leaders, that certain archetypes that tend to gravitate towards leadership more than others? Or is it truly, a need to have a mix of all four of these to be a leader that can be empathetic and to understand how to connect with people coming from different points of view?
Well, first of all, just to underscore, great leadership comes in all forms. So there's no such thing as a behavioral style combination. And by the way, we haven't talked about this, but we're all a combination of styles. Very few of us are
Nobody's
any one.
pure to one archetype, but one bird.
Exactly. So
Okay.
most of us are eagle parrots or dove owls, right? Or dove parrots, right? We have a primary style, we have a secondary style. Lots of people have a tertiary style, so they have three when they take the profile. So we're all a mix of these, which is why, again, we like to say match the moment, not the mirror. It's not about you so much it is about what does the moment require, and can you flex to the right style at the right time? So when it comes to leadership, nobody has to flex more than a leader because otherwise you're asking everyone to flex to you. And that's not a recipe for success,
Yeah,
right?
that's a leader that's not gonna win hearts and minds if you're always asking your people to bend to your belief and your direction. You've got to incorporate other people's points of view and ideas to be an effective leader.
Exactly. Now, I will say this, there is often a stereotype of what a quote unquote leader is. And the stereotype is it's the extroverts. It's the big vision people, or it's the strong leader, right? That's a stereotype. Now, it is true that eagles and parrots make great leaders, right? But they also make pretty lousy leaders, okay? Owls and doves make great leaders. They also make lousy leaders. It's not about the style, it's about how you apply it. Now, I will say this, uh, this is a bit of a business classic, but remember the book Good to Great?
Yep.
So there are five levels of leadership in Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. And if you just look up level five leadership, you'll find five traits. And what's interesting for me is that all five of the tippy top leadership level are dove traits. They're not eagle, they're not parrot, they're not owl, they're doves. And I think that doves are the least appreciated as potential leaders.
It's
And
because of
that's
that
a
quiet,
huge mistake.
sort of methodical, behind the scenes type of leadership that isn't always, demonstrative of the leadership skills that we envision with a leader, being vocal, being a cheerleader, being out in front, being motivational. Those are not necessarily traits of a dove.
Exactly. And yet, at least in Good to Great, level five leadership is all dove. Well, why is that? Well, because let's look at the dove traits: harmony, empathy, patience, sincerity. So doves are creating naturally psychological safety in their environments that give all the other styles the room to be themselves. So if I'm a dove and I don't have to be the smartest person in the room, I don't have to make all the decisions. I want the group to do that. Then that gives everyone else the opportunity to shine. And
Yeah.
so there's that's a hidden genius of dove energy.
And I
That
found
hidden,
that to be one of the most effective forms of leadership is, you as a leader, you've got the authority already. You don't have to fight to be able to speak, to get your ideas through. You've already got that natural authority by virtue of your role. The most effective leaders that I've seen through my career are the people that sit back more quietly and solicit others to bring their ideas to the forefront, to create a sense of harmony and collaboration that moves ideas forward, that make any one of those ideas better and bigger than it could have been if it just came from one person, as opposed to putting it out there for a well-tuned team to take and really bring to the next level. Um, so, it's
exactly
interesting.
now. So what if you take a dove leader and you sprinkle in some eagle energy? Go
I think
opposite and add 10, 12, 13% eagle. Now you've got a powerhouse. Or how about a parrot style, right? Big picture, great ideas, tons of positive energy, and you add some owl energy. Okay, give me 15% owl. Oh, goodness. Now this person is grounded in reality. Now they can combine. And by the way, there are people out there, 2% of the population, that when they take the profile, they come out as parrot owls or owl parrots. 2% of the population. We call that the inventors. That's the inventor pattern. Because think about it. The parrot is free form for ideas, totally open to what's possible. But then the owl side of them is an engineer and knows how to build stuff. You put those two together. By the way, I would venture, I haven't had the good fortune of having him actually do this, but I would venture that Elon Musk is an owl parrot. Tremendous owl energy, obviously an engineer, a software programmer, right? Tremendous visionary. So however you feel about him as a person, that's a completely different conversation. Just in terms of the way in which he operates in the world and how unusual he is, well, yeah, owl parrots are 2% of the population. Of course
Yeah.
they're.
That's a little bit of that old paradigm that we used to hear so much about of, the holy grail of the worker being the left brain, right brain, co-equal person that could think analytically and creatively at very high levels, that was such a sought after person. So
Yes.
you've kind of taken that to the next level with the mix of qualities across all four of the bird archetypes to demonstrate an ability to really adapt and flex to create that environment that's so effective. So Dan, let's talk a bit about cultural transformation and how this tool can really help in that process, which is so important to organizations, to have healthy cultures, places where people want to work, people work together effectively. But tell us about how the Birds model can influence the culture as a whole, and what kind of feedback have you received from organizations that have pursued the Birds as a way to understand its workplace dynamics and create more collaborative, harmonious teams?
Well, that's a really good question. So if you think about what organizational culture is, it's an amalgamation of individuals and each individual contributing their strengths, talents, and energy to the greater whole. And so how do we simultaneously reach individuals so that it matters to them, so that they feel that they're being heard, while at the same time steering the culture, the collective, in the direction we want to go in? And there are a number of tools that we employ for that, but the birds are definitely one aspect of it. So to illustrate this, when we talk to owls, for example, what are let's do a little reminder. What's critical to people with owl energy? Accuracy, detail orientation, systemization, analytics, rigor. If you ask owls, which one of those could you just cross out? You know what? We don't need analytics anymore. We're gonna take that away. They'll just look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean? We have to have that, right? So owls, another metaphor to use here is that what owls need, they're not traits. It's oxygen. Owls can't breathe if they're not working in an environment that honors and values data, systemization, analytics, and rigor. If our culture doesn't celebrate those aspects of success, then owls can't breathe and they
So are
can't.
you saying though that some of the bird archetypes are just not meant to work or to be effective in certain environments? So the culture may sometimes dictate the type of bird archetypes that thrive in that environment?
Well, let's get to that in a little bit. Let me answer that in a little
Okay.
bit. But where I'm going with this is that these are non-negotiables for owls. There's no such thing as effectively working in an environment unless we have attention paid to, again, analytics and data and systems. Well, okay, great, but you work with eagles. And their fundamental oxygen is decisive decision making, bottom line focus, being results obsessed. That's their oxygen. Huh. And then you've got parrot colleagues, they've got oxygen too. It's called being optimistic. It's called being really social and adding a lot of motivation and vision to their day to day. They can't breathe without that. And last but not least, what do our doves need? They've got oxygen. It's called being patient, called being empathetic, being sincere, seeking a collective decision, not just a single-minded decision. So, from a cultural perspective, you want everyone to breathe. And as a leader, it's your job to make sure that everyone can breathe. Now, what's the opposite of that? Well, imagine a team that's got, oh, I don't know, let's say you got 7 people on a team and 5 of them are owls. They're all owl doves. Okay, let's say it's a software team, okay, an engineering team, which tends to attract that behavioral style. But 2 of the people on the team, well, one's an eagle and one's a parrot. Maybe they're both eagle parrots. Maybe they're parrot eagle, but they're the opposite style. Well, where's the oxygen for them? If the owls are not careful, they're going to suck up all the oxygen because they're the majority. And the majority wants oxygen that they can. Well, wait a minute. We have a valuable minority and they can't breathe. And that becomes a cultural reality. Because what is culture? Culture is an operating system for how we get things done, how we do things, right? So when you employ the birds properly, you now have a heat map. Okay, this is what the owls need to breathe. This is what the parrots need. This is what the doves, this is what the eagles need. And you find a way to honor everyone so that everyone can breathe. And what does that mean? Everyone thrives. And as a leader, isn't that your ultimate output?
Yep.
Isn't it your
And
job as a leader to surface the genius of the people around you? How can you possibly do that if they can't breathe?
so that's a great example of how it can create a cultural transformation that creates an environment where people can thrive, yet be their own person, their own archetype, and relate more effectively with each other. I can see how that could increase employee retention and increase the morale of the environment, reduce burnout, and all the things that just drive people crazy because so much of it is figuring out interpersonal dynamics in the workplace and how do we, get things done in an effective way without ended up hating each other because we don't know how to communicate effectively with one another. So Dan, that's a great example of how cultural transformation can start to occur with this model really at the heart of driving it. Can you give us some examples of things that you've seen through your career where there's been an effective transformation within a culture driven by this archetype model?
So I once worked with a major media organization. So this team, which is essentially most of the company, is comprised of very creative people. So we've got artists, writers, animators. They're very creative. And so there are a lot of doves and parrots in that group. And again, it's a media company. And so that was really the majority style. Okay. So the natural culture of the company, just emanating from bird style, was of a gentler, more social nature. Well, wouldn't you know it, their CEO and their COO were high intensity eagles. And the high intensity eagles noticed something about the company meetings. The meetings were not efficient, they weren't effective. The core issues that needed to be talked about were avoided. In other words, the overuse of dove energy is to avoid conflict. The overuse of parrot energy is to do the same, just for different reasons. Okay. But eagles embrace conflict. And so the CEO had an idea. She said, okay, the next time you and I disagree, she's talking to her COO. The next time you and I have a real disagreement, let's take it outside and have it in front of the group. And they started doing that. Now, when both of these individuals, Jeff, let me tell you, high intensity eagle, okay? Like the volume goes up. The language gets colorful. Let's just put it that way.
I can
Okay.
imagine.
All right. And so they would literally open their offices, or one would go into the other, they open the door, and they would have it out in front of the entire team. Now, the very first time that happened, what do you think? How do you think the artists and the animators, all these doves and parrots, how do you think they reacted
Oh
to
my
that?
God, I would imagine they didn't know what to think, and they were probably very uncomfortable witnessing that type of an interaction.
Yep. In fact, a number of them afterwards came up to the CEO and the CEO, is everything okay? Are you guys, is the company in good shape? What are we doing? There were all these concerns. And in every case, both the CEO and the COO said, everything's great. No problem. That's
Because
just
it was
how.
a nominal interaction for them, right? Normal
Yes.
course of events.
So what do you think happened over the next couple of weeks? Well, they kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it, right? And over time, people acclimated. That's a human condition. We get acclimated to the stimulus that's around us,
They
okay?
normalized the behavior.
Totally normalized it. And so what happened over the course of time with their meetings? Well, the meetings got more interesting. The meetings got more contentious. People were more likely to speak their minds and take difficult issues and be candid about them out loud. And the CEO told me, she said, Dan, it was remarkable. Within a few months, we went from avoiding the difficult topics to having the freedom to address them.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, what a great application. That wasn't my idea. That was her idea. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I love that example because it's so 180 from where I think most people would think about the whole concept of personality assessment with the goal of understanding how to connect and relate and maybe move more to that person's space. Where here's an example in an organization that's, driving towards success, however you measure that. The goal is success. So in this case, the leader brings people back to a way of thinking that's more in line with what they view as a leader is needed in that environment to create success. And that might be a little bit more conflict, a little bit more willingness to delve into issues at a deeper level than perhaps the personalities in that room might normally have been comfortable with. So great example of moving the group towards a place where they can be more successful using this model. We haven't asked the big question. You've been doing this for a while. What's your archetype?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a parrot eagle.
A parrot eagle. So describe the qualities that make a parrot eagle in your context and how you view yourself within that framework.
So as a parrot, I'm energized by interacting with people, not systems. I'm not as driven towards the bottom line acquisition of a goal. I'm much more interested in exploring what's possible with the people that I interact with, which is why I do a lot of executive coaching and do a lot of public speaking. It's why, I mean, COVID was a disaster for everyone, but in particular for parrots, to go from being in the presence of other human beings as a matter of course to turning it all into Zoom was a soul-sucking experience for parrots. It was very difficult. Okay, so that's the parrot side of me. But the eagle side of me demands practicality. I need to know that we're actually moving in a direction that's measurable and that we can look back on it and say, yeah, we got better or we got worse. And so for me, the parrot eagle combination has been a good thing. Now, when I overuse the eagle side, I get in trouble. I'm too blunt. And when I overuse the parrot side, well, my head's in the clouds and I'm not grounded. So I've got to lean owl to stay grounded. And I've got to lean dove in order to be much more patient and to really think about the person I'm speaking with, as opposed to just being wrapped up in my own energy. So match the moment, not the mirror. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us.
And I imagine, once you become self-aware of the traits of each bird, then the ability to really be methodical and think through how do I flex up or move more into this space because I am aware of my own attributes, I'm aware of the person who I'm dealing with's attributes, and that just creates an ability, if you're considered in how you approach a conversation, to connect more effectively with one another. So that's an interesting archetype. So I took the assessment myself, and my categorization was an eagle-dove combination, which I thought was interesting. What does that say? Tell us a little bit about the interpretation of those two as a combination.
Well, eagle dove is also a two percenter. So that, Jeff, with all due respect, that makes you a bit of a freak.
I've been told that before, but
So think about this combination. I call it the leadership pattern. It's a phenomenal combination because eagles have conviction and eagles know how to rally others by presenting a vision with confidence, right? Eagle energy is essential to getting people to see something they otherwise wouldn't see or overcome challenges that would otherwise intimidate them. You've got that. But then you've got a paradoxal dove side of you that's all about relationships. No one builds trust more naturally than doves because dove energy is about caring for others more than you do yourself. So the reason doves are so trustworthy is that people naturally trust them, naturally know that they are looking out for them, not just themselves.
yeah, I've always found that to be a quality in a leader that I've looked up to as somebody who is more interested in your success and the success of the team than their own. And it's hard to not like and want to follow a person like that because then you know that they have the collective's best interests in mind, not their own.
Exactly. Exactly. So the eagle dove combination is the leadership pattern. I think the best example of that for me, and I am dating myself a little bit, but I think you will recognize the name. Jeff, I'm not calling you old, but I'm kind of calling you old here. Is Colin Powell.
Colin Powell, yes, a remarkable leader.
So for those of us who remember the first Gulf War, Colin Powell was the head of the military at the time, and
He
there
was
was a lot of
chairman
media.
of the Joint Chiefs, I think, at the time, was he?
Yes, yes, I think that's right. And he projected such an incredible combination of leadership. No one questioned his absolute resoluteness. I mean, this was clearly when he said something, you knew that it was going to happen, and yet he had a humanity about him that that was very accessible. So the accessibility was the dove side of him. The resoluteness and forcefulness was the eagle side of him. And that combination was an incredible display of leadership. And for a while, there was a lot of talk that he would run for president. Why? Because he was a military leader? No, because he commanded people's respect in a way that encompassed both eagle and dove energy.
I think that's a good example. And for those that remember the times, perhaps the Iraq War wouldn't have happened had, somebody of his credibility not pleaded the case that he had before the world. And it's a good example of how somebody with enormous credibility can really move, in this case, a nation towards a goal, just based purely on that style and that collective history that we've witnessed from somebody of that caliber of leadership. So, Dan, let me ask this. So, for our listeners that want to start using the birds model in their environment, where do they start? How do they begin? How can they leverage this tool to create a more effective team, a more collaborative environment?
Well, if you don't mind a little advertising here,
Absolutely.
they can go to orderdisc.com. That's orderdisc.com. And there you'll see the birds, and you can order a profile for yourself if it's very inexpensive, or you can do for your team. Or if you're interested in some team development or executive coaching, you can reach out to velocityadvisorygroup.com. And that's my organization. And we'd be happy to have a conversation with you about what your challenges are, what your opportunities are, and how we might be able to add value.
I think it's one of the most important things that you can do as a leader of any organization, a team big or small, is invest the time in figuring out how to get the people that you work with every day to better understand each other, to understand where each person is coming from, how to communicate effectively. And the rewards that you're paid back are just, enormous. Productivity, new idea generation, a more harmonious work environment. It's definitely worth investing the time. So let me ask my final question. So if there's one thing, Dan, that you want our listeners to take away from this conversation, what is that one thing that's most important?
I'll go back to match the moment, not the mirror.
Love
So
that phrase.
regardless of what your style combination is, if you honor the styles of the people around you, you will provide oxygen for them to be their best selves. And hopefully you'll inspire them to provide you with oxygen so that you can make your contribution. And when we do that, we really bring out the best in what is possible.
Wonderful. This has been a fantastic conversation. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have come away with some ideas on how to build more collaborative, harmonious teams. And I'm excited to have you back in the future, Dan, to continue to talk with us about ways to help organizations be effective and to help us all relate more effectively with one another. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. Really enjoyed it.